If he lets me walk out tonight, I may never survive what comes next. The first notes of the string quartet floated beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Cole Foundation gala, but Naomi Brooks barely heard them over the pounding in her chest. Every table in the Grand Chicago Ballroom was filled with investors, board members, reporters, and socialites wrapped in silk and diamonds, their conversations dissolving into a hush the moment she stepped onto the marble floor. Her deep emerald gown flowed around her 7-month belly, elegant and impossible to hide. The satin stretched over the life she had protected in silence for months. The lights were warm, golden, flattering to everyone except her, because tonight every spotlight felt like an accusation. Across the room, Ethan Cole stood at the center of it all, tall, sharp in a black tuxedo, his pale gaze unreadable beneath the glare of camera flashes. He was the face of Cole Dynamics, the white billionaire CEO every business magazine in America called untouchable, and yet the moment his eyes landed on Naomi, the air in the room changed. Her breath caught. She had imagined 100 ways this night might go, but not this silence. Not the way the crowd instinctively parted as if they sensed they were about to witness something they'd be replaying on social media before midnight. Ethan took one slow step toward her, then another, until the polished shine of his shoes reflected in the marble at her feet. For one suspended second, Naomi thought he might soften, that he might finally look at her the way he once had in the quiet privacy of his office after midnight meetings and long negotiations. Instead, his jaw tightened. His voice came low, cold, and sharp enough to slice through the orchestra. She leaves now. The words hit harder than the sudden silence that followed. A gasp rippled through the ballroom. Somewhere near the press wall, a phone lifted higher. Naomi's fingers instinctively moved to the curve of her stomach where the baby gave one firm kick, as if reminding her not to break. Her chin lifted. She would not give them tears. Not here. Not under these lights. Ethan, she said quietly, her voice steadier. Then the storm inside her. You don't have to do this. But his expression never changed. You should never have come. The room erupted into whispers. Names. Assumptions. Headlines being written in real time. Naomi could feel every stare crawling across her skin, but she turned before anyone could see the betrayal in her eyes. Her heels clicked against the marble in slow, measured beats as she walked toward the exit, spine straight. Dignity the only thing she had left to carry. Then the ballroom doors opened, and the cold Chicago night rushed in. The flashes followed her onto the steps. She barely made it to the curb before a black SUV swept in front of her, its doors opening with mechanical precision. 2 members of Ethan's private security stepped out. "Ms. Brooks, get in," one said. Her pulse spiked. "I'm not going anywhere with him." Before the sentence fully left her lips, headlights screamed around the corner. A silver sedan sped past the exact patch of curb where she had been standing a heartbeat earlier, tires shrieking against wet pavement before vanishing into traffic. Naomi froze. The security guard's voice dropped. "Now, ma'am." Her breath turned shallow as she looked back toward the gala doors. Ethan was there now, framed by gold light and shattered whispers, his face no longer cold but tight, with something darker, something urgent. Fear. The SUV door closed behind her, sealing her into darkness and leather and the scent of rain on wool. As the city lights blurred outside the tinted windows, Naomi pressed both hands over her stomach, feeling the baby move again, alive and safe for now. Only then did Ethan's words from inside the ballroom begin to sound less like rejection and more like a warning. And when the SUV turned not toward her apartment, but toward the private road leading to Ethan's hidden lakefront safe house, Naomi realized the humiliation under those chandeliers had only been the beginning of the truth. The SUV moved through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago in total silence, the city lights breaking into blurred ribbons across the tinted windows, while Naomi sat rigid against the leather seat, both hands protectively over her stomach. Her heart had still not slowed from the moment that silver sedan tore past the curb where she had been standing. The memory replayed in sharp flashes, the rush of headlights, the startled cry from someone near the gala doors, the way Ethan's expression had changed from polished indifference to something far more dangerous. Fear wrapped in control. Across from her, one of his security men kept his gaze forward, saying nothing, offering nothing, and somehow that silence made the air heavier. Naomi swallowed hard and forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale the way her doctor had taught her when the stress spikes came too fast. The baby shifted beneath her palms, a small steady movement that anchored her in the dark. "It is okay," she whispered under her breath, more for herself than for the child. Outside, the skyline gave way to the darker edge of Lake Michigan, where the city's glitter softened into long stretches of wet road and private gates hidden behind old trees. When the SUV finally slowed, iron gates parted soundlessly ahead, revealing Ethan's lakefront estate, a place so secluded it barely existed in public records. Naomi had only been here once before, years ago, back when Ethan still trusted her with things the board did not know. Tonight it felt less like a memory and more like a fortress. The vehicle stopped beneath a covered stone entrance. Before the driver could open her door, Naomi stepped out on her own, refusing to look shaken. Cold wind rolled off the lake and lifted strands of her dark curls against her face. The house loomed ahead, all glass, steel, and warm amber light glowing behind floor-to-ceiling windows. Beautiful from a distance, impenetrable up close. The front doors opened before she reached them. Ethan stood there waiting. His jacket was gone now, sleeves rolled to his forearms, tie loosened as if the perfect image from the gala had cracked the moment she disappeared from public view. For the first time that night, there were no cameras between them, no reporters, no board members, no audience hungry for blood. Just the sound of rain against stone and the lake wind threading through the silence. Naomi stopped 3 feet from him, her eyes blazing. "You humiliated me in front of half the city." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. "I got you out before they made their move." Her laugh came bitter and short. "By making me look disposable?" His gaze dropped briefly to her stomach, then returned to her face. "By making them believe you were no longer my weakness." The words landed strangely, cold in shape, but carrying something that made her pulse stumble. Before Naomi could answer, Ethan stepped aside and motioned toward the interior. "Come inside. You need to see this before midnight." The way he said it stripped the room of warmth. Midnight. A deadline. A clock already running. Against every instinct, Naomi followed him through the long glass hallway overlooking the black water. Her heels clicked softly against the polished oak floors as they moved deeper into the estate until he stopped outside a locked room at the back of the house. He pressed his thumb to the security panel. The door slid open. Naomi froze on the threshold. The entire wall was covered in screens, printed reports, and pinned photographs. Her prenatal appointment schedule, hospital intake forms, security stills from the underground parking garage beneath her apartment, financial transfers highlighted in red. A blown-up image of Vanessa Hale entering the women's health clinic Naomi had visited 6 days ago. Her breath caught. "What is this?" Ethan's voice dropped lower than she had ever heard it. Proof that tonight was never about shame. He stepped toward the central screen and tapped a paused surveillance clip. Vanessa's face appeared, elegant and smiling as she handed an envelope to a man Naomi recognized as a member of the board's crisis management team. Ethan looked at Naomi with a steadiness that felt almost painful. "By tomorrow morning, they plan to leak forged records claiming your pregnancy was a fraud and use the scandal to destroy your credibility before the inheritance hearing." Naomi stared at him, the room tilting around the edges. "My baby is not part of their company war." To them, Ethan said quietly, "The baby is the company war." The words hollowed the air between them. Naomi's fingers trembled as she touched the image of the clinic on the wall, realizing how close the lie had come to swallowing the truth. She turned to him slowly, disbelief and fury tangled together. "So you chose to break me first?" Ethan's eyes darkened with something heavier than guilt. "I chose the only move that kept you alive in their game long enough to show you this." And somewhere beyond the glass walls, thunder rolled across the lake as Naomi realized the danger surrounding her had never started tonight. It had only finally stepped into the light. Naomi could not look away from the wall of evidence. Every screen, every highlighted transfer, every time-stamped image seemed to pull another thread from the lie that had nearly swallowed her whole. The room was silent except for the soft hum of monitors and the distant rain tapping against the glass facing Lake Michigan. Her reflection stared back at her in the dark windows, a woman in an emerald gown, 7 months pregnant, standing in the middle of a war she had never agreed to fight. She pressed one hand against the curve of her stomach and turned toward Ethan, her eyes sharp with disbelief. "You said there was an inheritance hearing. What does my baby have to do with that?" Ethan stood still for a moment, as if deciding how much truth she was finally ready to carry. Then he crossed to the long oak table in the center of the room and opened a leather file she had not noticed before. Inside was a stack of documents bearing the Cole Dynamics crest, the kind reserved for internal family trust matters. He slid the top page toward her. Naomi's breath caught when she saw the name of Ethan's late grandfather, William Cole, followed by a clause she read twice before the meaning fully settled in. The first biological heir of Ethan Cole would automatically inherit controlling trust rights upon formal recognition. Her pulse thundered in her ears. They are coming after the baby because of shares. Ethan nodded once, grim and tired. 41% voting control shifts the moment the board recognizes the heir. Naomi looked back at the wall, at Vanessa's image frozen in polished perfection, and suddenly every sideways glance at the gala, every whisper from the board's wives, every sudden interest in her doctor appointments made sickening sense. This had never been about morality, image, or scandal. It was about ownership, legacy, control. Her child was not just a baby in their eyes. He was leverage worth billions. Naomi's throat tightened. And Vanessa wants the board to believe the pregnancy is fake so they can block the trust transfer. Yes, Ethan said. If they destroy your credibility before the hearing, they can delay recognition for years. The baby shifted hard beneath Naomi's hand, and she closed her eyes for a second, grounding herself in that small movement. Life. Real. Innocent. So far removed from the cold calculations surrounding him. When she opened her eyes again, she looked directly at Ethan. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" The question came out quieter than the anger burning behind it. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the answer visible in the way his shoulders dropped. "Because the moment they knew you were informed, they would change strategy. Tonight forced them to believe you were isolated and exposed. It bought us a few hours." Naomi stared at him, caught between outrage and the terrible logic of it. He had turned her humiliation into camouflage. The cruelty of it still stung, but the strategy was undeniable. She moved closer to the largest monitor where the surveillance footage from the clinic remained paused. Vanessa's smile on the screen was composed, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. Naomi narrowed her eyes. "Who gave her access to my medical schedule?" Ethan tapped another file open on the screen. A familiar name appeared. Melissa Grant, Naomi's obstetric nurse coordinator. Her stomach dropped. Melissa had adjusted her appointments twice this month. Always apologetic, always warm, always offering herbal tea during long checkups. Naomi's hand tightened against the edge of the desk. "I trusted her." Ethan's voice softened, though the steel never left it. "That is why Vanessa used her." For a long moment Naomi said nothing. The betrayal from the gala had been public, sharp, humiliating. This one was quieter, more intimate. It reached into the fragile space where she had felt safest. Her doctor visits. Her baby's heartbeat. The place where fear was supposed to be met with care. She swallowed hard and lifted her chin, the same way she had done beneath the chandeliers hours earlier. Then we stopped waiting for them to make the next move. Ethan looked at her, something unreadable flickering behind his calm. "Respect, maybe. Relief. I was hoping you would say that." He stepped to the final screen at the far end of the room and pulled up tomorrow's board agenda. At exactly 8 a.m., one line glowed in bold letters. Emergency Trust Verification Session. Naomi read it, then slowly turned to him. "They are forcing the hearing in the morning." "Yes," Ethan said. "And they expect you to be too broken by tonight to show up." The room fell still again, but this time the silence felt different. Not fear. Focus. Naomi rested both hands over her stomach and lifted her gaze to the storm-dark lake outside the glass. By sunrise, they would either erase her child's place in the Cole legacy forever or walk into that boardroom and make the truth undeniable. And for the first time since the gala, Naomi no longer felt like the woman being hunted beneath the lights. She felt like the mother of the one truth they could never afford to lose. The storm had thinned to a cold mist by the time dawn began to silver the horizon over Lake Michigan. But inside Ethan's safe house the air remained taut with the kind of silence that only comes before a reckoning. Naomi stood in the guest suite facing a floor-to-ceiling mirror, the emerald gown from the gala replaced by a tailored cream dress Ethan's house manager had laid out before sunrise. Elegant, understated, impossible to dismiss. The fabric curved smoothly over her 7-month belly, and for a long moment, she simply rested both hands there, feeling the slow, steady movement beneath her palms. Her son was awake, alive, still untouched by the greed waiting in that boardroom. That thought alone steadied her breathing. Behind her, the bedroom door opened softly. Ethan stepped in, already dressed in a charcoal suit, every line of him sharp and controlled again, but there was no trace of last night's public cruelty left in his eyes. What remained now was something quieter and more dangerous: resolve. He held out a slim folder. These are the certified originals from the family trust attorney in Boston. Vanessa only has copies of the amended version the board pushed 3 years ago. Naomi took the folder and opened it carefully. The documents inside carried embossed seals, notarized signatures, and William Cole's original trust language naming the first biological heir as irrevocable once paternity and birth were established. Her throat tightened as the reality settled deeper. They had not only planned to humiliate her. They had been preparing for years to rewrite the family's future before her child ever took his first breath. She looked up at Ethan. "How long have you known they were changing the trust?" His expression hardened. "I suspected after my grandfather died, but I did not have proof until last week when Vanessa forced the emergency hearing onto the agenda." Naomi studied him, the fatigue in the edges of his face, the looseness in the control he usually wore like armor. "So the gala was your way of forcing them to move early?" Ethan gave a single nod. "If they thought you still trusted me, they would have delayed and found a cleaner way to erase you. They needed to believe you were alone." The words should have stung more than they did, but Naomi now understood the precision behind every cruel second beneath those chandeliers. The public wound had bought them the private truth. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "At 8 o'clock, Vanessa will present forged clinic records and testimony from Melissa Grant to challenge your credibility. They expect you to fold under pressure." Naomi closed the folder and lifted her chin. "Then I will give them the one thing they did not plan for." Something flickered in Ethan's gaze, almost admiration. "And what is that?" Her hand moved over the curve of her stomach, protective and proud. A mother with proof. By 7:40 a.m., the black sedan rolled into the underground garage beneath Coal Dynamics. The city above was already alive with morning traffic, but down here the silence of polished concrete and fluorescent light made every step feel heavier. Ethan walked beside Naomi, not touching her, but never more than half a step away. Security doors opened in sequence as they moved toward the executive elevator, each layer of clearance a reminder of how much power was waiting on the floor above. When the elevator doors slid shut, the mirrored walls reflected them side by side. The white billionaire heir in charcoal gray, the black woman he had publicly cast aside less than 12 hours earlier, now carrying the living contradiction to every lie the board had built. Naomi met Ethan's reflection. "When those doors open, no one speaks for me." His eyes held hers in the mirror. "Understood." The elevator chimed on the 42nd floor. The boardroom doors were already open. Inside, the long walnut table gleamed beneath recessed lights, surrounded by faces that shifted from smug confidence to visible surprise the moment Naomi entered at Ethan's side. Vanessa Hale sat near the far end in a cream blazer, every strand of blonde hair perfectly in place, but the controlled smile on her lips faltered for the briefest second. It was enough. Naomi saw it. Fear. Not of Ethan. Of her. At the center of the table sat the chairman, flanked by trust attorneys and legal counsel. A projection screen glowed with the words "Emergency Trust Verification Session." Naomi walked forward slowly, heels steady against the hardwood floor, and took the empty seat directly across from Vanessa. No shaking hands. No hesitation. Just the calm certainty of someone who had spent the night transforming humiliation into purpose. Vanessa recovered first, folding her hands with polished grace. "Ms. Brooks, I was not expecting you after last night." Naomi met her gaze without blinking. "That was your first mistake." The room stilled. Even the attorneys stopped moving their pens. Ethan remained standing near the head of the table, silent, letting the truth belong to the woman who had carried it alone this long. Vanessa's smile sharpened. Then let us begin with the medical inconsistencies. Naomi slowly reached into the cream folder in front of her and placed William Cole's original sealed trust document on the table, the embossed crest catching the boardroom lights like a blade. "No," she said, her voice low, clear, and impossible to interrupt. "Let us begin with the forgery." The boardroom went so quiet Naomi could hear the faint hum of the city through 42 floors of glass. Every eye locked on the original trust document resting beneath the recessed lights, William Cole's embossed crest catching the polished walnut table like a challenge no one in the room had expected. Vanessa's expression held for exactly 1 second before the first crack appeared. Her perfect smile tightened, the corners sharpening into something colder. "That document was replaced years ago," she said smoothly, turning toward the chairman as if confidence alone could make the lie legal. "The board approved the revised trust after William's death." Naomi did not look away. Approved is not the same as authentic. She slid the second page from the folder across the table, the notarized chain of custody certificate from the Boston family attorney attached beneath it. The chairman's brows drew together as he adjusted his glasses and read the date aloud. "Transferred directly from William Cole's estate vault 8 hours ago." A ripple of unease moved around the table. One of the attorneys reached for the page, then another, their polished certainty beginning to fracture under the weight of paper and seal. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her voice still calm but thinner now. "Even if the original language stands, it changes nothing without credible proof of pregnancy and paternity." Naomi had been waiting for that line. Across the room, Ethan remained silent near the windows, hands resting at his sides, letting her command the truth exactly as he promised. Naomi turned toward the legal screen mounted on the wall. "Please bring up Exhibit C." One of Ethan's counsel, seated near the chairman, tapped a key. The screen flickered to life. Instead of the forged clinic records Vanessa had prepared, a time-stamped security video filled the wall. Melissa Grant appeared entering Naomi's women's health clinic after hours, escorted not by medical staff, but by Vanessa's executive assistant. An envelope changed hands. The footage cut to a second angle, then a third, each one clearer than the last. Melissa accepted a financial transfer authorization code linked directly to an offshore account under Hale Strategic Holdings. No one in the room moved. Vanessa's breath caught, almost too small to notice, but Naomi heard it. The chairman slowly turned toward her. "Would you like to explain why a nurse coordinator received $150,000 from your private holding company the same week these falsified records were created?" Vanessa's silence answered before her words ever could. "This is circumstantial." Naomi rose from her chair, the movement deliberate, calm, every eye following the woman they had expected to collapse. "Then let us make it undeniable." She placed a sealed hospital envelope on the table, fresh from the independent maternal specialist Ethan had sent before sunrise. The chairman opened it with visible care. Inside was the current ultrasound summary, biometric measurements, and a signed physician statement confirming a healthy 28-week pregnancy with all corresponding medical markers consistent across 6 months of records from separate providers. The room changed in an instant. What had begun as suspicion was now turning into exposure. Naomi's voice remained low, but it carried farther than anyone else's. "You built an entire emergency hearing around the hope that public shame would keep me silent. You counted on me being too humiliated to walk in here this morning." Her gaze shifted to Vanessa. "That was your second mistake." Around the table, board members exchanged looks no longer hidden behind corporate neutrality. One older director, a longtime ally of William Cole, cleared his throat. "If Ms. Brooks is carrying the first biological heir, the trust language is self-executing at birth." Another added, "Provided paternity is acknowledged." For the first time, Ethan moved. He stepped away from the windows and walked to the head of the table, every movement precise, unhurried, impossible to ignore. The room instinctively straightened around him. He placed both palms on the walnut surface and looked directly at the chairman. "Then let the record reflect my formal acknowledgement." The words landed like thunder in a room built on silence. Naomi felt her breath catch, not from surprise, but from the finality of hearing him say it where every legal consequence would hold. Ethan's pale gaze moved once to her, steady and certain. "The child Naomi Brooks is carrying is my son, and the lawful first heir to the Cole family trust. The chairman lowered his pen slowly, absorbing the weight of what had just shifted. 41% of voting control no longer lived in theory. It had a future heartbeat. Vanessa stood abruptly, the first visible break in her composure. This is not over. Naomi remained standing, one hand over her stomach, her spine straight beneath the boardroom lights. No, she said, meeting Vanessa's unraveling calm with absolute dignity. It is finally beginning. And just as the chairman called for an immediate suspension of all amended trust motions pending fraud review, Naomi felt a sudden tightness low in her abdomen, sharper than the stress she had carried all night. Her hand pressed instinctively against the edge of the table. The baby moved hard. Then the second wave came, deeper, undeniable, and Ethan's expression changed before anyone else in the room understood why. The second wave tightened low across Naomi's abdomen with a force that stole the air from her lungs, subtle enough that no one else in the boardroom noticed at first, but Ethan saw it immediately. His expression changed in an instant, the cold executive control giving way to something far more personal. Concern. He moved to her side before the chairman had even finished calling for the fraud review recess. "Naomi," he said quietly, his voice dropping beneath the noise of chairs shifting and legal counsel beginning to argue over procedure. "Look at me." She lifted her eyes to his, breathing carefully through the pressure. It was not pain exactly, not yet, but a deep tightening that made the room feel suddenly smaller. Her doctor had warned her that severe emotional stress could trigger early contractions. After the gala, the safe house, the betrayal, the hearing, and the exposure, her body was finally demanding a response. Naomi kept one hand over the curve of her stomach and forced a slow breath. "I am okay." Ethan's jaw tightened in that familiar way that meant he heard the words but did not believe them. "We are leaving now." Across the table, Vanessa remained standing, pale beneath her polished makeup, watching the shift in focus with visible disbelief. The woman who had spent months reducing Naomi's pregnancy to a corporate obstacle now had to watch the board's attention fracture completely. The chairman rose, voice suddenly stripped of ceremony. "Mr. Cole, take her. The hearing will resume after the hospital confirms maternal and fetal stability." Those words changed the room more than any legal document had. Maternal and fetal stability. No longer rumor. No longer scandal. Just reality. Ethan slid one arm carefully around Naomi's back. Not possessive, not controlling, only steady. "Can you walk?" Naomi nodded once, refusing weakness even now, and together they moved toward the boardroom doors. The 42nd floor hallway seemed brighter than before, the morning sun now fully rising over Chicago and spilling silver across the glass walls. Every executive assistant, legal clerk, and passing vice president froze the moment they saw them emerge. 12 hours ago, the company had watched Ethan publicly cast her out beneath chandeliers and camera flashes. Now he was guiding her through headquarters with one hand firm at the small of her back, his expression daring anyone to speak. The elevator ride down was silent except for Naomi's measured breathing. Another contraction came, stronger, enough to make her close her eyes for a second. Ethan pressed the emergency privacy override, halting the elevator's external call access. "How far apart?" he asked. Naomi checked the clock on the mirrored wall. "About 10 minutes. His gaze sharpened. "That is too soon for 28 weeks. Stress can do that," she whispered. The baby moved beneath her hands, not frantic, just active, alive, reminding her why she could not let fear take over now. The doors opened directly into the underground executive garage where the black sedan was. Already waiting. Ethan's head of security stepped forward, but one look from him was enough to clear the entire floor. No drivers. No assistants. No board observers. Ethan opened the rear passenger door himself and helped Naomi inside before circling to the driver's seat. Naomi blinked in surprise. "You are driving?" His hands tightened on the wheel as the engine came to life. "No one else gets between you and the hospital today." The city blurred past them in silver and steel as they cut through downtown traffic toward Northwestern Memorial, sirens from the company's private medical escort clearing intersections ahead. Naomi leaned back against the leather seat, focusing on the skyline, on the river flashing beneath bridges, on anything that kept her mind from spiraling into what-ifs. Ethan's voice broke the silence, quieter now, stripped of the boardroom steel. I should have told you sooner. Naomi turned her head toward him. The sunlight coming through the windshield caught the strain in his face, the guilt he had carried beneath strategy and control. You protected the company first, she said softly. His grip on the wheel tightened. No, I protected you the only way I knew how, and I hated every second of what it cost you. The honesty of it settled deeper than the apology itself. For the first time since the gala, Naomi saw the man beneath the CEO, the one who had been fighting a war inside his own family, while trying to keep her standing long enough to survive it. Another contraction came, and this time Ethan reached across the console without taking his eyes off the road, his hand finding hers. Not dramatic, not desperate, just present, grounding. By the time the hospital came into view, glass towers gleaming under the sharp Chicago morning, Naomi's breathing had steadied into the rhythm the nurse taught her months ago. The car stopped beneath the private maternity entrance where a physician team was already waiting with a wheelchair. Ethan stepped out first, then turned back to her, his hand extended. Naomi looked at him, at the man who had humiliated her beneath crystal lights to save her from a boardroom built on lies, and for the first time she took his hand without hesitation. As the hospital doors opened and warm light spilled over them, Naomi knew the next truth would not be proven in a boardroom or on a trust document. It would be proven by the sound of her son's heartbeat on a monitor where no lie could reach him. The private maternity floor was wrapped in a kind of silence that felt sacred, broken only by the soft rhythm of monitors and the distant roll of carts along polished hospital corridors. Naomi lay propped against crisp white pillows, one hand resting over the monitor belt secured around her stomach while the green line on the screen pulsed with her son's heartbeat. Fast, steady, reassuring. The contractions had slowed the moment the maternal specialist adjusted her medication and moved her into observation, confirming what everyone suspected. The stress from the board hearing had pushed her body too close to the edge. For now, the baby was stable. Those words still echoed in Naomi's chest with a relief so deep it almost hurt. Stable. Ethan stood near the window overlooking downtown Chicago, jacket off, tie loosened, his phone lighting up every few seconds with calls from legal counsel, the board chairman, and 3 separate media outlets already circling the emergency hearing fallout. He ignored them all. The skyline beyond the glass was bright with late morning sun, but the room itself felt removed from the city's noise, as if for the first time in days the world had narrowed to what truly mattered. Naomi, their son, truth stripped of spectacle. The specialist stepped in with a tablet and a calm smile. The contractions are irregular now, which is good. Baby's heart rate is strong for 28 weeks. We want full bed rest for at least 24 hours and minimal stress. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan with the kind of pointed professionalism that carried more meaning than the words themselves. That includes no boardroom drama. Naomi almost smiled. Ethan gave the faintest nod, unusually obedient for a man used to controlling every room he entered. Once the doctor left, silence settled again. Naomi turned her head toward the monitor, listening to the rhythmic pulse that had suddenly become more powerful than every board vote and trust clause combined. Ethan crossed the room slowly and sat in the chair beside her bed, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. He looked tired in a way Naomi had never seen before, not physically, but morally, as if the weight of every decision from the gala to the boardroom had finally settled where he could not hide from it. The board suspended Vanessa pending a full fraud investigation, he said quietly. Naomi let the words settle. She will not stop. No, Ethan admitted. But she no longer controls the narrative. Naomi turned to him fully now, the soft hospital light catching the edges of his face. Neither do you. The words were not cruel, just true. Ethan held her gaze and, after a long moment, gave the smallest exhale of surrender. You are right. It was such a rare thing, hearing him say that without strategy wrapped around it, that Naomi felt something in the room shift. Not romance, not forgiveness, something quieter. Respect earned under pressure. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his discarded jacket and pulled out a folded document, placing it gently on the blanket beside her. Naomi frowned and unfolded it carefully. It was a public legal declaration filed with both the board and the Cole Family Trust before they arrived at the hospital. Formal paternity acknowledgement, irrevocable and effective immediately. Her breath caught. You filed this already? Ethan nodded. The moment the chairman called recess. Naomi stared at the paper, at the signature written in the same precise hand that had once signed billion-dollar mergers and last night signed away her dignity beneath chandeliers. Now it had signed something infinitely more human. Protection without conditions. Her eyes lifted slowly to his. Why now? Ethan's voice dropped, steady and stripped of every public mask. Because our son deserves to enter this world with his place protected before anyone else has a chance to challenge it again. The word "our" lingered in the quiet room. Not possessive, not manipulative, simply honest. Naomi rested her hand over the document, then over her stomach, feeling the baby shift beneath both. Truth and paper. For the first time, the future felt less like a battlefield and more like something she might actually be allowed to build. A soft knock interrupted the stillness. Ethan's head of security stepped just inside the room, lowering his voice. Sir, the press is gathered outside the private entrance. The board leak already hit financial media. Ethan rose immediately, every line of him sharpening back into the man who knew how to face cameras and crises. But before he turned away, Naomi spoke. Do not hide this from me. He looked back. She held his gaze with the same dignity that carried her through the gala and the boardroom. If you stand in front of those cameras, tell the truth. All of it. Do not protect your image. Protect our child's. Something changed in Ethan's expression then. A quiet recognition that the woman in this hospital bed was no longer the vulnerable target Vanessa had tried to erase. She was the mother of the future Cole heir, and she understood power as clearly as any executive in the tower downtown. Ethan gave one slow nod. Then that is exactly what I will do. He turned and walked toward the door, toward the waiting cameras, the shareholders, the headlines, and the public storm still raging beyond the glass. Naomi listened as the door closed behind him, then turned back to the monitor where her son's heartbeat filled the room again, stronger than scandal, stronger than greed, stronger even than fear. And as the sound settled into the silence, Naomi realized the next time Ethan stood beneath bright lights, it would not be to cast her out. It would be to bring the entire truth into the open where it could never be buried again. The private entrance of Northwestern Memorial was washed in white noon light, and the relentless flicker of camera flashes as Ethan stepped through the sliding glass doors alone. Reporters surged behind the barricades, microphones lifted, voices colliding into one sharp wall of questions about fraud, inheritance, and the woman he had publicly humiliated less than 24 hours earlier. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole did not walk past the cameras. He stopped directly in front of them, the Chicago skyline rising in steel and glass behind his shoulders, and let the silence gather. The same silence that once belonged to power now belonged to truth. Last night, he said, his voice low and clear enough to cut through the noise, I made a public decision that caused harm to the woman carrying my child. The crowd stilled, every lens locked tighter. Somewhere behind the front line of reporters, financial anchors were already speaking into live feeds. Ethan did not blink. I did it because members of my own executive circle were preparing a fraudulent attack on her medical credibility in an attempt to strip my son of his legal inheritance before birth. A wave of gasps moved through the press pool. He continued before anyone could interrupt. That fraud has now been exposed. The responsible executive has been suspended pending criminal and civil review, and my son's legal recognition has been filed irrevocably. Inside the maternity suite upstairs, Naomi watched the live press conference on the muted television mounted across from her bed. Closed captions scrolled beneath Ethan's face, but she barely needed them. She could read the truth in the way he stood there without deflection, without hiding behind legal language or public relations phrasing. For once, the man who controlled headlines was surrendering to one. The hospital room remained quiet except for the soft pulse of the fetal monitor and the whisper of air through the vents. Naomi rested one hand on her stomach and listened to the heartbeat beside Ethan's image on the screen, the two rhythms strangely aligned. Her son moved gently beneath her palm, as if he too could feel the shift happening outside those walls. A soft knock broke her focus. The maternal specialist stepped in, tablet in hand. her expression calm, but more serious than before. "Your contractions are spacing out, which is excellent," she said, checking the monitor line. "But there is one thing we need to discuss." Naomi's pulse lifted slightly. "The stress response elevated your blood pressure more than we like to see at 28 weeks. I want you here overnight, full monitoring, and absolutely no emotional strain." Naomi almost laughed at the impossibility of that last part. Before she could answer, the television volume rose from the hallway as a nurse passed by with another patient. Ethan's voice carried faintly through the doorway. "This child will not enter the world under a cloud of lies. His mother will be treated with the dignity she should have received from the beginning." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. Dignity. The very thing he took from her under crystal chandeliers was now the thing he was rebuilding beneath camera flashes. Upstairs and downstairs. Private truth and public repair. The symmetry of it almost felt unreal. When the doctor left, Naomi turned the volume up just enough to hear the final questions. A reporter called out, "Mr. Cole, are you saying Naomi Brooks and the child are under threat?" Ethan paused, and even through the screen Naomi could feel the precision of what came next. "I am saying," he answered, "that from this moment forward, every legal, corporate, and personal resource I have will be used to protect them." The room fell silent around her. Even the nurses in the hallway seemed to slow. Naomi stared at the screen, at the man standing under harsh daylight saying the words she had needed to hear before any board vote, before any trust clause, before any safehouse wall covered in proof. Not because she needed rescue, but because now he finally understood what protection was supposed to look like when it did not come at the cost of her dignity. Her phone buzzed on the tray table. A message from the board chairman appeared. "Emergency vote completed. Fraud amendments voided. Air rights secured pending birth." Naomi read it twice, then lowered the phone to her lap, feeling a slow warmth replace the cold vigilance she had carried since the gala. For the first time, the future no longer felt like something she had to defend alone. Outside, the press conference ended in a storm of shouted follow-ups, but Ethan gave them nothing more. No polished exit line, no rehearsed smile, just the truth already spoken. Minutes later, the hospital room door opened, and he stepped back inside, the noise of cameras fading behind him as the latch clicked softly. Shut. He looked tired, sunlight still catching the edges of his suit, but there was a steadiness in him that had not been there before. Naomi met his eyes, then glanced once toward the television where the headline now ran across every financial network in America. Coal air rights secured after fraud exposure. Ethan crossed to her bedside and looked down at the monitor where their son's heartbeat continued its calm, unwavering rhythm. "It is done," he said quietly. Naomi rested her hand over his on the edge of the blanket. Not romance, not absolution, just shared truth earned in public and protected in private. Beyond the glass, Chicago moved on beneath bright afternoon light, but inside the room something far more lasting had shifted. The lie was over. The air was protected. And now all that remained was the one moment no boardroom, no headline, and no betrayal could control, the day their son would finally arrive. 3 weeks later, Chicago woke beneath the first pale gold light of dawn, the skyline washed clean after a night of rain, and inside the private maternity suite the world narrowed to the quiet sound Naomi had been waiting to hear for months. Her son's steady cry filling the room with living proof that truth had survived every lie built around it. The delivery had come early but safely, under the careful watch of the same maternal specialist who had guided her through the storm of the past weeks. Now the room glowed with warm morning light, soft against white blankets and polished wood, and Naomi sat upright in bed with her newborn son resting against her chest. His skin was a rich, warm brown, his tiny fingers curled around the edge of the hospital blanket, and every breath he took seemed to rewrite the fear that once lived in this story. She traced the curve of his cheek with one trembling fingertip, the tears in her eyes not from pain, but from the overwhelming quiet certainty that no boardroom, no forged file, and no public humiliation could ever touch this moment. Beside the bed, the bassinet card already read the name she had chosen in the stillness of the night, Elijah Cole Brooks. Not hidden, not denied, protected by both legacy and love. Earned the hard way. The door opened softly, and Ethan stepped into the room carrying the morning light with him. He had been there through every hour of labor, every doctor update, every late-night blood pressure check, never once stepping in front of her decisions, never once turning the moment into anything but support. His suit jacket was gone, sleeves rolled, tie absent, looking less like the billionaire whose name moved markets, and more like the father who had spent the last 12 hours learning the shape of helpless love. He stopped beside the bed, his gaze falling first to Naomi, then to Elijah, and for a moment all the power in Chicago seemed smaller than the look on his face. "Oh." Naomi lifted her eyes to his. "Do you want to hold him?" Ethan exhaled slowly, almost like the question itself reached somewhere he had kept guarded for years. He nodded once. Carefully, Naomi placed Elijah into his arms. The baby settled instantly, one tiny hand pressing against Ethan's shirt as if he already recognized the steadiness in him. Ethan stared down at his son, his pale eyes softening in a way no shareholder meeting, no public speech, no empire ever could have drawn out. "He has your calm," he said quietly. Naomi smiled, tired and radiant in the same breath. "And your stubborn heartbeat." Outside the suite, the hospital hallway stirred with the beginning of another busy day, but inside the room time seemed to pause around the three of them. A soft knock broke the stillness. The board chairman stepped in, accompanied by the family trust attorney from Boston. Both men removed their coats with respectful formality, the atmosphere shifting from intimate to historic. The attorney opened a leather portfolio and placed a sealed document on the side table. As of Elijah's live birth at 6 pounds, 2 ounces, all trust protections are now fully vested under William Cole's original terms. The chairman offered Naomi a rare, genuine smile. "Your son now holds the future voting trust rights of Cole Dynamics." Naomi looked at the sleeping child in Ethan's arms and felt the weight of the words settle not as pressure, but as proof. This was never about power for her. It was about ensuring her child entered the world with dignity intact. Ethan looked from the attorney to Naomi, then back to Elijah. "Then let the first thing he inherits be truth." The chairman gave a quiet nod and stepped out with the attorney, leaving the room once more to the family who had been forged in public fire and restored in private grace. By late morning, the hospital discharged them through the same private entrance where weeks earlier Ethan had faced the cameras alone. But this time the glass doors opened to a different kind of light. The press was there again, microphones raised, lenses flashing, yet the energy had changed completely. Naomi stepped out first, dressed in a soft camel coat, Elijah wrapped securely in a cream blanket against her chest. Her posture was the same as it had been at the gala, straight-backed, unbroken, dignified. But now there was no humiliation in the light, only truth. Ethan walked beside her, one hand steady at her back, not guiding, only present. The reporters shouted questions about the fraud scandal, the heir, the trust, the board's restructuring, but Naomi did not stop for any of it. She simply lifted her son slightly, enough for the cameras to catch the smallest glimpse of the child they had all tried to turn into a headline before he was born. "This," she said softly, her voice carrying farther than the noise, "is the only proof that ever mattered." The flashes exploded brighter, but this time they did not feel like weapons. They felt like witnesses. Ethan opened the car door for her, and before Naomi stepped inside, she turned once toward the Chicago skyline rising behind the hospital towers. Weeks ago, the city had watched her be publicly discarded under chandeliers. Today it watched her leave as the undeniable mother of the future Cole heir, carrying not revenge, not triumph, but dignity restored beneath open daylight. And as the car door closed gently behind her and Elijah settled against her heartbeat, Naomi knew the story no longer belonged to scandal, lies, or the people who tried to erase her. It belonged to the child in her arms, the truth in his name, and the quiet strength it took to survive long enough to let the light find her again.